Story 1. My workmate went with his wife to the hospital while she was in labor. He almost passed out and splashed his face with water, saying he could not do this. His wife called him out, saying he was doing nothing and that she was the one doing it. He managed to support her through it. Story 2. My dad worked in obstetrics at a Detroit hospital for some time. After witnessing a black husband scream at his black wife for giving birth to a white baby, my dad made a habit of telling first-time black fathers that their babies often appear much lighter than their parents. That poor woman. Story 3. It wasn't the staff, but I called my brother to ask how my sister-in-law was doing during her induction. He said he didn't know. He had gone home because it could take a while. I was like, "You left." My husband took such good care of me during my induction, as a partner should. It blew my fucking mind. By the time my niece was born, he did not want to look because it would be gross, and he had to sit down because he felt like he was going to pass out. My sister-in-law said that the nurses doting on him and bringing him Gatorade gave her the motivation and anger she needed to make that last big push. I have never been more disappointed. Story 4. My mother-in-law likes to tell the story of how my father-in-law, a lawyer, was in court arguing a case when she went into labor. This was the 1980s, so there were no cell phones. All she could do was call the courthouse, leave a message with someone, and head to the hospital on her own. The result was my father-in-law, about an hour later, showing up on the maternity ward totally disheveled and still in his formal court attire, having run 15 blocks from the courthouse to the hospital as soon as he got the message. In my country, attorneys wear black robes, waistcoats, and small white collar tabs, so he made quite a sight. He made it in time for the birth. Story 5. A relative who is a doctor told me this story about his first night on call as a general practitioner. He received a call at 1 a.m. from a man who had been at the pub and returned home to find his pregnant wife in early labor, at about 32 weeks. The doctor told the man to call an ambulance, then drove to the house. When he arrived, there was no ambulance. The father answered the door pale and said, "She has had the baby, doctor." The doctor went inside, quickly confirmed the baby was breathing and that the mother was all right. Discovering the father had not called emergency services, he used the landline to arrange an ambulance and a bed in the neonatal intensive care unit. This was before cordless phones, and the phone was not in the bedroom, so he could not see the patient. While he was on the phone, he heard the father shout, "Doctor, there is something else coming." He replied, "That is the placenta, do not worry." A couple of minutes later, the father shouted in a much higher voice, "Doctor, is it supposed to move?" The doctor dropped the phone and ran to the bedroom. It was an unexpected twin, born inside the amniotic sac. After stabilizing the second baby, he had to call back to request a second ambulance and 2 neonatal intensive care unit beds. Story 6. While my mother was undergoing a cesarean section and I was feet first, my father fainted, hit his head, and received stitches in the downstairs emergency room. My mother never let him live it down. Story 7. As a student midwife, my mentor and I were looking after a couple who had become pregnant on their first date and were still very much in the honeymoon period. When she was offered an internal examination, she asked us to leave the room so that her partner could moisten her up first. Story 8. Overheard in an orthopedic operating room by 2 men. Junior resident. "Oh, my wife just called. She is on her way into labor and delivery." Senior attending. "Oh, congratulations. See you later, then." Junior resident. "No, it is her first. It will take a while. I can do this case." Senior attending. "Listen, son. As someone who has been divorced, I am telling you that you need to go now. You are not scrubbing this case." Story 9. I was an emergency department nurse, and patients had to pass through the emergency department to reach labor and delivery. One man wanted to watch Monday Night Football while his wife was in labor. He showed up with a 12-pack of Bud Light, a bag of Oreos, and a hibachi grill in case he would be there a while. Another man was so nervous about watching his wife give birth that he passed out in the parking lot. A security guard found him. He had struck his head on the curb, needed 50 sutures to close a scalp wound, and was taken to the labor and delivery waiting room, where he fell asleep on a sofa. His wife had no idea where he had gone and did not find him until she was being discharged. Another man was a local radio disc jockey and a first-time father who wanted everyone to know about the birth. He provided a play-by-play from the delivery room for his listeners. His wife finally had enough and began shouting obscenities until he stopped broadcasting. Story 10. I worked with someone whose partner took her to the labor ward. He gave his mobile number to the staff and told them to call when the baby was nearly there because he was going to wait in the pub. He walked out, and a few hours later he was not allowed back in because he was drunk. They are divorced now. Story 11. My mom told me a story from when she worked at the hospital. A mother did not know which man was the father, so two men showed up. One wore a very nice three-piece suit. The other wore a red devil costume. A leotard, horns, a tail, and a pitchfork. True story. Story 12. A pleasant but shy woman came in with a partner. You could tell they did not know each other very well. He was just the child's father. Everything went well. The next morning she came in and he was lying in bed beside her. There were very strange vibes between them. It turned out he had tried to have sex with her the day after she gave birth. Story 13. Story from the opposite end. My eldest godson is now 21. This story goes back to his birth. My friend had a tendency for premature, fast labors. Her first arrived 2 weeks early after a 4-hour labor. Her second arrived 5 weeks early after a 2-hour labor. This was her third. Her husband was out of town and she was bored and 30 weeks pregnant. They had a plan in place, but it didn't happen. We had just sat down and ordered pizza in Chelsea when she suddenly stood up and said, "We need to go to the hospital now." I looked confused and said, "But you've still got a couple of months." She explained about her first two and said she wasn't going to give birth outside a hospital. We canceled the pizza. Her waters broke in the doorway. She flagged down a black cab, had contractions, and tried to call her husband and the maternity ward while staying as calm as she could. At the hospital maternity ward, there was still no husband. The midwife told me to put down the phone and be in there with her. I laughed and protested that I wasn't her husband or the child's father and kept trying to call him. While they dressed me in protective gear, no one answered. 57 minutes from that first twinge, the baby arrived, screaming. My friend passed out. Apparently she did that each time. She had kept it a surprise. I was left holding him, sure something else was about to happen. The midwife answered the husband's call, said, "Well, that was a roller coaster," smiled, handed me the phone back, took the baby, and I spoke with the husband. I asked why no one had warned me. That was exactly why they wanted someone with her at all times. Ironically, her fourth and final child a few years later, a girl after 3 boys, arrived on schedule after a 14-hour labor. Story 14. The number of men who bring their entire gaming systems, including a TV, into the labor and delivery room to play with friends while their partner gives birth is astounding. Story 15. My mother told me my father arrived with a face full of lipstick kisses when my brother was born. They did not split up and had me 10 years later. Story 16. I had just become the father of a beautiful baby girl. While I was filling out the forms for her birth certificate and other paperwork, I casually commented to the nurse that they must see a lot of nervous fathers. She said she had seen men run out of the building to get away. I was speechless. Story 17. A father brought in a flat-screen television and a PlayStation and played Call of Duty Live while I was trying to help the baby's mother breastfeed. He loudly shushed me because he said the other men could hear me. Sir. Story 18. I was the charge nurse one night when my nurse came and told me she had walked in on a father breastfeeding from the mother, who was the patient, on his knees with a breast in his mouth. The baby was in the crib, whining, "Hey, it's my turn." The nurse just walked right back out. Story 19. Former labor and delivery nurse. I've had a few fathers pass out during vaginal deliveries and in the operating room during cesarean sections. We always had some who said they hunted and processed their own deer and could handle anything, but they turned green when their wife or partner was being operated on. One father hit the floor when I was starting his wife's intravenous line. My patient nearly got out of bed after him. I had the bed raised to start the intravenous, so she was too high off the floor to safely get out. Fortunately, I was able to use the call light to get someone else into the room, and the father was fine. In the obstetric emergency department, a patient and her boyfriend came in. The doctor asked if the patient had any discharge, so she turned and asked her boyfriend if she was having any discharge. The doctor asked why she was asking him, and the boyfriend replied that he did the laundry. A father who worked as a nurse on a different unit was in the hospital while his wife was admitted for observation for preterm labor and preeclampsia with high blood pressure. He used his staff ID badge to access the supply room and other restricted areas, adjusted the fetal and contraction monitors himself, which is strictly prohibited, and argued with staff because we did things differently on our unit. Not my patient and I was not there that night, but a father had his wife and his girlfriend in the hospital at the same time in labor, and neither woman knew the other existed. He kept going back and forth between the two rooms and, as far as I know, was not caught during the hospital stay. One father, he and my patient had been married, separated, and reunited for one night, resulting in the pregnancy, and the patient's teenage brother had a farting contest every time I entered the room. They and the patient found it hilarious, but the room smelled terrible. Those are the ones off the top of my head. Story 20. My dad told the doctor and nurses when I was born a girl that they should throw me back and called me a split tail. I know this because he still brags about it 40 years later. He is an asshole. I wonder what the people there thought about it. Story 21. Why are you crying? To a woman who had a third-degree tear while giving birth. Story 22. During an emergency cesarean section, my now ex-husband looked over and exclaimed, "Is that her liver?" He leaned closer, and a nurse promptly elbowed him in the nose. Story 23. After I delivered the baby, I asked the new father if he had known it would be a boy. He replied, dead serious. Well, the doctor said there was a 50% chance, so I was pretty certain. Story 24. My friend worked in labor and delivery in a rural area. After a woman gave birth to her first child, the husband asked the doctor, "How soon can I get her pregnant again?" He did not ask as a joke. Story 25. It was not the staff. It was my baby's father who left mid-labor to clean the house, also known as cheating on me. He came back only when I demanded it because they had broken my water. He then returned drunk and slept through my entire labor. The nurses woke him to cut the cord, and he went back to sleep. He lasted about 3 weeks after the baby was born before I kicked him out. Story 26. Our first pregnancy was a difficult one. So while I worked, a friend would stay with my wife at the time to help her. I was working on a telephone line while on a ladder in the middle of an intersection when that friend rushed up and said she had just taken my wife, who still had weeks to go, to the hospital. I slid down the ladder, dropped my tools in the intersection, told my groundsman he was on his own, and ran to the hospital. I was not going to miss this for the world. When my first grandson was born earlier than expected, they wanted us there as soon as possible to keep my daughter-in-law's mother, who was an absolute nightmare, out of the delivery room until everything was done. Because of my emergency medical services background, they also wanted me to help them understand the medical devices and procedures that were being used. Any father who does not step up and be there for the baby's mother is a punk. Story 27. I am a nurse, not in labor and delivery. I heard this story. After labor, the mother was transferred to the mother-baby unit. The nurse entered and found the father attaching a full gaming setup to the hospital television. The nurse immediately unplugged the television and told him he could not use hospital equipment for entertainment. She then chastised him for not participating in care. You do not mess with older nurses. Story 28. I'm not maternity staff, but after giving birth I developed postpartum preeclampsia and needed to stay longer in the hospital. The baby was fine and was allowed to stay with me. My husband wanted to go home to sleep in a comfortable bed. I told him through gritted teeth that I could literally die and that he would not get to go home for comfort. I think that really opened his eyes, because from then on he has been amazing and supportive. Story 29. My dad went outside for a smoke, and when he came back I was born. Story 30. A partner stripped naked to get into the birthing pool with his wife or girlfriend. The midwife did not know what to do. There was no issue with him choosing to be in the pool with his wife, although after seeing what is in a birthing pool after a delivery, I would not choose to be there. The strange part was that he felt it was acceptable to completely strip in front of a midwife who was maybe 23 or 24 years old and a male doctor. His wife was wearing more clothing than he was. Story 31. Labor and delivery nurse here. My favorite story is from when I was the second nurse on a delivery. The mother was having her fifth baby. The gender was a surprise, and the couple already had 4 girls. When the baby boy was delivered and the father saw the genitals, he grabbed me, jumped up and down, and shouted, "It has a wiener." Story 32. I once witnessed a father breastfeeding his wife in the post-anesthesia care unit. He was a fellow employee, and we later took several hospital-wide classes together. He will always be remembered for that incident. Story 33. This is terrible. I also heard a story where the mother needed stitches after a vaginal birth, and the father told the doctor to make her extra tight, so he could enjoy her that night. My mother was mortified and would go pale every time she told that story. Story 34. A relative who was a general practitioner working as a locum got tired of the midwives calling him for a delivery very late in the birth. If the baby arrived before the doctor got there, the midwife received the delivery fee, so the late calls were deliberate. He started to go to bed fully clothed and managed to get there in time after that. The crestfallen expressions on the midwives' faces were classic. It was not so much that he begrudged the midwives the fee as that he was angry at being woken up at 2 a.m. and driving to the hospital for no reason. Story 35. I worked at a birth center that offered water births. We had one room with a large tub where partners could get in to sit beside and support the person in labor. The mother arrived in active labor, removed her clothes, and got into the tub. The father ran in right behind her, got completely naked, and jumped in. He was surrounded by 4 women who frequently had to put their hands in the water to check fetal heart tones. None of us knew what to do. I think he realized immediately that he had done something wrong and did not know how to fix it. Story 36. I was examining a woman, and her partner turned to us and said, "This makes me so horny. You don't know how uncomfortable I felt at that moment." Story 37. One of my coworkers brought his Xbox to the hospital and played Fortnite on the hospital wireless internet. I am not talking about waiting before the baby is born. I mean after the baby is born, when you are still in the hospital. He played with my friends online, and they said you could hear the nurse in the background in the middle of the night checking on his wife and baby while he played. Somehow he is still married, and she thinks he is a great dad even though he is worse at home. Story 38. We had a birth where, in the last few hours, the mother's blood pressure spiked and her labs were questionable for preeclampsia. We started magnesium sulfate to prevent seizures. When used for that, you begin with a large bolus dose over 15 minutes to raise the levels quickly, then a lower continuous infusion to maintain them. High magnesium levels can cause muscle weakness and, in severe cases, respiratory depression. She progressed quickly and delivered not long after the bolus. She was not pushing well, so the baby stalled as his head was emerging and his heart rate dropped. The physician performed an episiotomy to get him out. The combination of magnesium and the delayed delivery left the baby floppy and not breathing well, which is scary, but usually a bag and mask to provide a few breaths helps them recover quickly. Instead, the father freaked out, screamed at the top of his lungs, and swung at the nurse caring for the baby. He missed, but every nurse on the floor came running, thinking the mother had died, because the scream was so primal. They escorted him and the rest of the family out of the room while the family yelled that we were breaking the baby. The baby was fine and crying before the neonatal intensive care unit arrived from down the hallway. The mother was very apologetic and grateful. The father and family did not apologize but calmed down enough to return once the baby was stable. Story 39. I was not labor and delivery staff, just a mom. My husband forgot how to spell my name when he called to ask if we should go to the hospital. We were first-time parents and in total denial because I went into labor early and it was the middle of the night. I have never let him live that down. Story 40. My friend's ex-boyfriend was kicked out for taking her laughing gas while she was in labor. Story 41. It was not maternity staff but a couple from high school who had a baby. She delivered a healthy baby. He injected heroin in a bathroom, overdosed, and ended up in the emergency room. He lost custody not long after. Shockingly, this incident alone was not enough. Story 42. While my mother was in labor with me and driving to the hospital, my father suggested they get the car washed first. Story 43. I work as a photographer in the mother and baby unit. Once a father, not joking, told me he had never changed a diaper. This was his third baby, and he said he would call his mother to come and change the baby rather than do it himself. When I told my husband the story, he said, "You would not be able to waterboard that out of me." Story 44. I am not sure if this counts. I was a labor and delivery nurse many years ago. I frequently had women come in for evaluation to check if their water had broken. It is not always obvious. One woman came in with her partner and explained her symptoms. A small trickle that had happened twice. The partner then said, "I think it is just my man juice. We had sex about an hour before that." I wanted to gag. Story 45. When my mom was in labor, my dad tweaked his back in the hospital. They gave him a drug that knocked him out, so he spent my birth high on whatever it was they gave him. Story 46. I am not a nurse, but my ex-husband sat in the waiting room with his mother while I labored, laughing out loud. Story 47. When my mom went into labor with my brother, my dad was having dinner at a client's house. She called and told him she was heading to the hospital. This was my dad's third child and my mom's first. So instead of rushing to be with his wife, he stayed to finish dinner, had dessert and an after-dinner drink, and arrived a few hours later. I think this is because my dad and his clients were of a generation when men were not expected to be in the delivery room. They stayed outside, hanging around with cigars and whiskey. He made up for this by advocating for my mom when she said something wasn't right as the doctors patted her hand and called her a hysterical first-time mother. She was right. My brother's heart had stopped beating. He's fine now. Story 48. One of the strangest things we saw from a maternity ward employee. When I gave birth to our first daughter, we were not married. The father and I had to sign a paper acknowledging paternity. Our baby looked so much like him and his sister that we joked she might not be mine. He said, "I'm positive I'm her dad, but are you sure you're her mother?" And other silliness. The maternity clerk had a brain freeze and was adamant he had 90 days to refute the paternity claim and suggested a deoxyribonucleic acid test. We were loudly laughing, and he was clearly joking while I stood in a hospital gown wearing a medical bracelet. I did not think the clerk knew how babies were made and born, even with the chart information right in front of her. I said, "Ma'am, I'm sure I'm her mother. I just gave birth hours ago. It says so right here," and pointed at the chart. He added, "Ma'am, I asked her if she was sure she was the mother. I never said I doubted she was my child. How did you conclude we needed a deoxyribonucleic acid test?" The clerk sat and blinked for a full minute before it registered. Story 49. My fitness-obsessed dad went hiking the morning after I, the first child, was born. My mom was angry. 38 years later, he is still fitness-obsessed and a jerk. Story 50. I'm not a midwife, but this story about my dad was caused by my aunt, who is a midwife. My dad used to work in a factory. One day he badly cut his hand on the machinery. He rushed to the hospital only to be met by my aunt, who jostled him into the labor ward. The first thing my mum did was squeeze his hand. He fainted, was rushed to accident and emergency, and missed my birth. The worst part was that my siblings were born when fathers were still not allowed in the room with laboring mothers. I was the first and last child with whom he had this chance. My mum said she woke up to find him holding me while very politely arguing with staff who wanted to take me to the nursery. Story 51. My mother was at the hospital to give birth to me, and my father was admitted at the same time with ulcers. I wonder if there is any correlation. Story 52. A friend of my parents, who is not medical personnel, visited recently and told us a story. When his wife was pregnant in the 1990s, because she was over 35, it was considered a geriatric pregnancy, so they took a sample of amniotic fluid. As he watched the ultrasound screen, the baby reached toward the needle. At that moment, he realized he was going to be a father and fainted. The nurses helped him into a chair and woke him. It may not be unusual in medical settings, but it made me laugh. Story 53. A coworker told me that when the doctor was suturing her after an episiotomy, her husband asked for an extra stitch or two to tighten the area. Neither the doctor nor my coworker was amused. Story 54. We had an expectant father refuse to sit down when the anesthesiologist arrived to place an epidural. One look at the needle and he fainted, hitting his head hard enough to need stitches. I had to go downstairs to the emergency department to tell him his baby had been born and that he had missed it. The nursing staff were polite to his face, but they were laughing about the incident for months afterward. Seriously, men, accept that you may be overwhelmed by your partner's life-giving strength and sit down when the nurse tells you to. You have one job. If you cannot handle that, I feel sorry for your children. These are often the same men who require their spouse to prepare meals and leave detailed instructions for a 2-day work trip, which is deeply frustrating. Story 55. A father pulled a gun on the midwife. A couple came in. The woman was in active labor. Our midwife was a retired colonel in the army and a very tough woman. The father came in chest out, talking about the son he expected and all the things he would be. The midwife joked, "What if it's a girl?" The father insisted it would be a boy. They had no prenatal care and had not had an ultrasound. As labor progressed, the father grew more anxious while his partner was in pain, repeating that it was his boy. The midwife tried to calm him, but the situation intensified. When the baby was born, it was a girl. The midwife looked down and shouted, "Oh, his penis fell off. It's a girl." The father looked at the baby and at his partner, confused. He seemed to calm, and after the baby was wrapped, he took her immediately. The mother did not have a chance to hold the baby. The rest of the staff became very concerned for mother and baby. The midwife remained in control, but then the mother had complications. She had a retained placenta and was bleeding badly, so the midwife called orders to prepare the mother for the operating room. At that point, the father jumped up and shouted, "You're not taking her anywhere." He had the baby, threatened staff, and stood nose to nose with the midwife. The mother was at risk of bleeding out, so staff tried to retrieve the baby and get the mother to the operating room. The father became violent and said the mother would not leave his sight and that she had better not die. He then pulled out a gun. The police were called. There was a scuffle, and staff were able to get the baby out of the room while the midwife took the mother to the operating room for a dilation and curettage. I do not remember what happened to the father. We were all terrified for the mother and the baby. If he returned to her, he would likely control her. Child Protective Services became involved, but we lost the family to follow up and never learned what happened. It was horrible and very sad. Story 56. This is not about maternity staff, but here are the joys I endured from my ex during labor. When it started, he left me alone the entire day to tinker in the garage. He did not once ask if I needed anything. After my waters broke and I was in full-blown, cannot move or breathe labor, he said he had a migraine, so I would have to make my own way or call an ambulance. He got really angry at me because he had stood in my amniotic fluid. Presumably, he thought I should have cleaned it up. Eventually, after a round of swearing, he drove me to the hospital and left me there for 1.5 hours, giving a vague explanation about getting something from the house, which was a 20-minute round trip. He did not say a single word to me during the 4 hours I was left in the assessment unit. Not one word. He just sat in the corner reading his book, the migraine apparently gone, and rolled his eyes when I made any sounds. I reached 10 centimeters during this time. No support, no midwife, no gas and air. As soon as the midwives came to take me to the labor ward, he sprang into action as the caring, supportive partner, putting on a great show, flirting with the student midwife and making everyone laugh. Finally, my beautiful baby boy was born, and as they lifted him over to put him on my chest, he peed all over my ex-little legend. Story 57. This whole thread is solidifying my choice to be child-free. Story 58. My husband had a friend who was an alpha male and insisted on watching his wife's cesarean section to prove how strong he was. Every single person, both medical and non-medical, said this was a terrible idea. Needless to say, he fainted. He went home not long after the birth because he felt disrespected. He did go back to visit but refused to stay at the maternity ward for the following 6 days. We supported the wife in the subsequent divorce that began not long after. Story 59. Childbirth exposes every man's true wiring. Some faint, some film, some find religion mid-contraction. Story 60. The birth center where I worked was next to a grocery store and a thrift store. A couple we cared for had intellectual disabilities and were very lovely. The mother was in active labor. The father got her to the area but became distracted and wheeled her into the thrift store after he saw a squirrel. The thrift store called to report that the patient was actively pushing in an aisle while the father chased the squirrel. The baby was a healthy girl, and we made sure they received comprehensive wraparound services. Story 61. I work in theaters. We were performing a forceps delivery with the father present, sitting with his partner. After delivery, while we were suturing her episiotomy, he walked over to the incubator at the foot of the theater to take pictures. On his way back, he looked at what we were doing, sucked his teeth, and said that it was a bit of a mess. He then stuck his finger into the placenta, which was on my trolley in a receiver, and proceeded to lick it. They were taking the placenta home, but that is beside the point. He was then taken to the waiting room. Story 62. My wife developed preeclampsia at 29 weeks and was admitted. They originally told us they wanted to keep her pregnant for 5 more weeks and to expect our baby to need the neonatal intensive care unit. We agreed that I should not take all the time off work, so the plan was for me to work, visit her for a few hours, then go home to get ready for the next day. It turned out they were struggling every day to keep her blood pressure down before I ever arrived. I received a call 5 days later telling me to get there for the cesarean section. After being suited up and seated, my wife asked how I was doing. I said, I'm hoping this nice doctor can do a 2-for-1 and give me the snip while I'm here because I don't want to do this again. Some staff found it hilarious. Others did not. Story 63. A dad kept saying his newborn has very handsome calves and feet. It was so disturbing I couldn't stand to be near him. Story 64. Our son was born at home. The midwife arrived after the birth. I supported my wife and was the first person to hold our son. I really needed a break afterward. Story 65. Not staff, but a father. I almost missed the birth of my son because I am not great with blood or anything that looks painful. I made the mistake of looking when the doctor performed an episiotomy, which is a cut from the vagina toward the anus, and I almost fainted. I stepped out. My wife knew this might happen. We had a contingency. Her mother was outside the room ready to step in for me. I got a Gatorade from the vending machine and sat down for a minute until the feeling passed. Then I went back in. To this day, 18 years later, I still have some residual trauma from that. Even typing the word episiotomy gives me chills. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.